Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm so glad you're here with us today.
It's good to be back.
We have a topic on the table that honestly, I think haunts the back of everyone's mind, especially when you turn on the news or scroll through your feed and just see the state of the world. It's about power. It's about how the world actually changes versus how we think it changes.
It is a fundamental question of governance, really. How do you get things done? How does society move from point A to point B?
Exactly. And to answer that, we have a stack of sources today that is, well, it's intimidating, I'm not going to lie.
The heavy one.
We've got history, we've got political science, we've got ancient philosophy, and we have some extremely dense data analysis.
Right.
But our job, as always, is to take this mountain of information and distill it down into something actionable, something you can use to navigate your own understanding of what's happening out there.
And it is a heavy stack. But the mission today is arguably one of the most important we've ever taken on. We are here to challenge perhaps the oldest, most ingrained assumption in human history.
Which
The
is,
assumption that might makes right.
right, the classic schoolyard rule that grew up, got a suit, and acquired a nuclear arsenal.
That's a perfect way to put it.
I mean, we all know the saying, history is written by the victors.
Yeah.
And usually when we picture the victors, we picture the guys with the biggest swords, the most tanks, or the largest army. That is the standard narrative of how civilization advanced through conquest.
Exactly. That is the narrative of the Leviathan.
Yeah.
It's the story we are told in textbooks. Empire A conquered Empire B because they had better chariots or better gunpowder. That's the default setting for how we think about history.
Yeah, that's how it works.
But the sources we are looking at today, specifically a comparative analysis titled The Paradigms of Power, alongside the groundbreaking data from researchers Chenoweth and Stephan, suggest that this narrative is fundamentally flawed.
Flawed how? Like morally flawed. I think we all kind of get that.
No, not just morally. Functionally flawed.
Yeah.
Factually incorrect regarding what actually works.
Okay, now that's interesting.
The sources suggest that while violence has certainly been the loudest engine of history, it hasn't necessarily been the most effective one. They argue that there has been a quiet, parallel evolution happening for the last 2,000 years.
A parallel evolution
Yes.
of what?
Yes, the evolution of nonviolence. I want to be very specific here because usually when people hear nonviolence, they think of passivity.
Yeah.
They think of doing nothing.
Well, they think of people just asking nicely for their rights. Pretty please stop oppressing me.
Right, and that is so far from what we are talking about. We are tracing the evolution of nonviolence from a spiritual, almost passive idea into a sophisticated, weaponized strategy for political change.
Weaponized nonviolence. I like that phrasing. It sounds contradictory, but it really grabs you.
It feels contradictory because of our conditioning, but the data supports it. And this is the big tease for later. We have a specific statistic from the 20th century that completely flips the script on what works better for toppling dictators. If you had to bet your life, literally bet your survival on a revolution, would you choose the guys with the guns or the people with the protest signs?
My gut says guns. If I'm fighting a brutal dictator who has a secret police and tanks, I want a tank of my own. I want to fight fire with fire. That's just instinct.
Most people would say that. That's the intuitive answer. It's the logical answer based on the stories we've always been told.
Right.
But the data we're going to discuss shows that between 1900 and 2006, nonviolent campaigns were successful 53% of the time, while violent insurgencies only succeeded 26% of the time.
Whoa. Okay, let's just pause there for a second. Let that sink in. You are saying I am statistically twice as likely to win if I don't use a weapon.
Precisely. More than twice as likely.
That is wild. It goes against every action movie I've ever seen, every history book I've read.
It does. And today we're going to unpack why that is. Because it's not magic. It's mechanics. It's a technology of social change.
The techno.
Yes. So we're going to look at the ancient roots of this idea to prove it's not just some modern hippie invention. We'll look at the grim statistics of the violent approach, the Leviathan. And then we are going to break down the actual gears and livers of how you dismantle a dictatorship without firing a shot. using examples like the Philippines and something called the 3.5% rule.
53% versus 26%, I really can't get over that. It's a paradigm shift.
It is.
But okay, before we get to the modern data and the mechanics of victory, we have to understand the context. We have to talk about the beast we're fighting against, the Leviathan.
The Leviathan. This is a concept often associated with the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, the idea of the nation state holding a monopoly on legitimate force.
The idea that the government is the only one who gets to use violence and they do it to keep order.
Exactly. And if you look at the last 2,000 years of history, the dominant timeline is almost exclusively draped in violence. Conquest, slavery, colonial expansion, world wars. It's just one bloody conflict after another.
It's the Game of Thrones version of history, the Red Wedding on a global scale.
It is. And the toll is staggering. One of our sources points out a specific data point that is just hard to process. Between 1900 and the present, approximately 187 million people died directly due to war.
187 million.
Yeah.
That's not just a number, it's an abstraction. It's so big you can't even picture it. It's an erasure of humanity on a scale that's almost beyond comprehension.
It's incomprehensible. And you have to understand, this violence is backed by a very specific logic. It's not just random chaos. It's the logic of survival of the fittest, or Machiavellian politics.
The end justifies the means.
Right. The idea is that physical force is the most efficient, most final way to settle a dispute. You have Mao Zedong's famous quote, "Political power grows from the barrel of a gun."
And on the surface, that seems logically sound. If we're in a room and we disagree and I have a gun and you don't, I win the argument. I have the power. End of story.
In the immediate moment, yes. You control the room. For now. But here's the trap, and this is where the source material gets really interesting. It analyzes the duration of these violent conflicts.
Okay.
Violence is frequently used, but it rarely reaches a definitive conclusion. Instead, it creates these cycles of retributive conflict.
So it's like a feud that never ends. You kill my guy, I kill your guy, and it just goes on for generations. A perpetual motion machine of grievance.
Exactly. The source lists some daunting examples. Look at the Chechen-Russian conflict. That isn't just a 1990s problem. The source traces the conflict back 232 years.
2 centuries of fighting over the same mountains. That is just exhausting to even think about.
Or the Muslim conquest of Afghanistan, 228 years. The Crusades took up nearly 2 centuries. The conflict doesn't end, it just goes into remission for a while.
So the argument is that violence is actually incredibly inefficient. It doesn't solve the problem, it just suppresses it for a while until it explodes again, like putting a lid on a boiling pot.
Right. It's a temporary fix that creates long-term instability. It's the logic, the strong in the short term, but it's a failure in the long term because it never changes the mind of the opponent, it just breaks their body. As soon as they heal or their children grow up, they fight back with a vengeance.
And a memory.
And a deep historical memory.
Okay, so that's the dominant narrative. The Leviathan. The endless war. But you mentioned this hidden stream, this parallel evolution. Where does that start? Because presumably people have always wanted peace. But when does it become a system? A strategy?
It starts with a concept called ahimsa.
Ahimsa. Now, I've heard that term in yoga classes. It's usually translated as nonviolence.
Well, it is, but the translation nonviolence is a bit passive, a little weak. The etymology is fascinating and much stronger. It comes from the Sanskrit root hais, which means to strike or to kill.
Okay.
The prefix ade is a negation. So literally it means not striking, but the source emphasizes it in the ancient texts. It's deeper than just not hitting. It is the absence of the desire to harm.
That's a massive distinction.
Yeah, it's huge.
I cannot hit you because I'm afraid of getting arrested or because you're bigger than me, but I can still want to hit you. I can still hate you. Ahimsa is saying I shouldn't even have the intent.
Correct. It's an ontological foundation, a state of being. It's not about your actions, it's about your core. And this goes way back to the 8th century BCE with Jainism. Lord Parsvanatha and leader Mahavira codified this. They called it the greatest dharma, or the greatest cosmic law.
So for the Jains, this wasn't just a rule like don't speed. It was a fundamental law of the universe, like gravity.
Yes. The Pancha Mahabharata, the 5 great vows of Jainism, lists ahimsa first. Before truthfulness, before not stealing. You abstain from harm in thought, word, and deed.
Thought, word, and deed. That's comprehensive.
It is. And Buddhism picked this up as well, linking it to the concept of karma. that harming others inevitably harms you. And Hinduism wrestled with it in texts like the Bhagavad Gita, dealing with that core tension between the duty of a warrior and the virtue of non-injury.
But here's the skeptic in me coming out again. That sounds beautiful. It sounds great for a monk living in a monastery or an ascetic in a cave. But did this actually work in the real world? Did anyone try to use cosmic law to stop an army back then because the ancient world was brutal?
That is the crucial question. And for a long time, ahimsa was mostly a personal ethic, a path to individual enlightenment. But we do have early experiments in civil resistance where we see this principle applied collectively.
Oh, this is what I want to hear.
One of the most striking examples comes from Judea, around 26 to 36 CE.
Under the Romans, so this is high stakes.
Yes, under Pontius Pilate. Now, history remembers Pilate as a pretty ruthless governor, not a guy you mess with.
Not known for his gentle nature, no.
At one point, Pilate decided to install Roman standards, basically military flags or poles with effigies of the emperor inside Jerusalem.
And to the Jewish population, those aren't just flags. That's a huge provocation.
No, they are idols, graven images. It was a massive, deliberate violation of their religious law. In that era, that is usually a recipe for an armed uprising. That's the script.
Right, the zealots would grab their daggers and start a rebellion.
But this time, they didn't. They marched to Caesarea, where Pilate was headquartered, and they staged a massive sit-in outside his palace. They didn't shout, they didn't attack, they just stayed there for days.
A silent protest.
Yes. Pilate was furious. He surrounded them with soldiers and threatened to cut them down if they didn't disperse.
So he threatened a massacre, he called their bluff.
He did, and this is the cinematic moment. The protesters, en masse, bared their necks. They leaned forward and exposed their necks to the swords. They signaled that they were willing to die rather than fight, but they would also never accept the idols.
So they weren't bluffing, they were making a statement.
It was more than a statement. It was a display of total, unbreakable non-compliance. Pilate was stuck. He realized that if he massacred thousands of unarmed civilians who weren't fighting back, he would lose all legitimacy. He couldn't govern a graveyard. He would create a rebellion he couldn't control.
He would become a monster in the eyes of Rome and everyone else.
Exactly. So he withdrew the standards.
That is incredible. That's nearly 2,000 years ago, and it sounds like a modern protest, like something from the civil rights movement.
It was an early form of civil resistance, but, and we have to be honest with the sources here, it didn't always work.
Yeah.
We have to look at the tragedy of the Moriori people to understand the risks.
I remember this from the reading. This was the cautionary tale. Who were the Morioris?
They were a branch of the Maori people living on the Chatham Islands, way off the coast of New Zealand. They were isolated. And in that isolation, they had developed a society based on a strict religious vow called Nunuku's Law.
And what was that?
It was a vow of total nonviolence. They resolved all disputes ritually, sometimes with clubs, but they weren't allowed to cause serious injury or death. No warfare, no killing.
Sounds idyllic, a pacifist utopia.
It was, until 1835. A militarized Maori group from the mainland of New Zealand, who had obtained muskets from European traders, invaded the islands.
Okay, so a pacifist society meets a society with guns for the first time.
Yes. The Moriori actually outnumbered the invaders. They held a council of elders to decide what to do. The young men wanted to fight back. They said, this is different, this is survival.
But the elders said no.
The elders decided that Nunuku's Law was a moral imperative that could not be broken, even for survival. They believed their principles were more important than their lives. So they walked out to greet the invaders with peace offerings.
And what happened?
They were slaughtered, enslaved, killed, and even cannibalized. The culture was almost entirely wiped out in a genocide.
Oof. Okay, that is a heavy, heavy reality check. It's just heartbreaking.
It is. And the expert insight here is that isolated nonviolence in an age of unchecked expansionism was incredibly vulnerable. The Moriori had the spirit of nonviolence, but they were facing an aggressor who didn't share their moral framework, and they didn't have a political strategy to apply pressure.
They couldn't make it backfire on the invaders. There were no newspapers, no Roman Senate to appeal to.
Exactly. It highlights that for nonviolence to be a weapon, it needs more than just intent. It needs strategy. It needs leverage. It needs an audience.
That brings us to the pivot, because today we don't just see nonviolence as a way to get martyred like the Moriori. We see it as a way to win like the protesters in Judea. When did that shift happen? When did we go from saintly to strategic?
The 19th century. This is where the timeline really accelerates.
Yeah.
We move from nonviolence as a spiritual retreat, something you do for your own soul, to nonviolence as a tool for social reform, a weapon for changing society.
What was the catalyst?
A huge one was the Peterloo Massacre in England in 1819.
Peterloo, what happened there?
You had 60,000 to 80,000 people gathering peacefully in St. Peter's Field in Manchester. They were demanding parliamentary reform. The right to vote, basically.
Yeah.
This was a pro-democracy rally.
So not a violent mob.
No, families, workers, reformers. But the local magistrates panicked and sent in the cavalry.
Literally the cavalry, horses and sabers.
Yes. They charged into a crowd of their own citizens. Panic, trampling, people slashed with swords. Militarily, it was a rout. The government won the field, they cleared the square.
But politically, I'm guessing that didn't look good.
Politically, it was an absolute disaster for the government. The public outcry was massive. The newspapers, which were becoming a real force, picked it up. This is what we call the backfire effect.
Okay, explain that.
When a state uses disproportionate violence against unarmed civilians, it undermines its own legitimacy. It makes the regime look weak and terrified, not strong and in control.
It strips away the illusion of order. If you have to charge into a crowd of weavers and families with war horses, you aren't really in control. You're just a bully. You've lost the moral high ground completely.
Exactly. And innovators started to realize this dynamic could be leveraged. You have Daniel O'Connell in Ireland in the 1820s.
Yeah.
He founded the Catholic Association. He didn't build an army. He built a membership list.
So he organized the population?
Yes. He used mass pressure monster meetings with hundreds of thousands of people collecting a Catholic rent of a penny a month from the population. It was economic and political pressure, not military, to secure rights for Catholics.
Then you have the American abolitionists.
Right. The Underground Railroad wasn't just hiding people. It was mass civil disobedience on an incredible scale. They were breaking the Fugitive Slave Acts, not with guns, but with coordination and secrecy and moral conviction. They were changing the law by systematically refusing to follow it.
And this leads to the intellectual heavyweights, the lineage of the idea. This is where it gets codified.
The lineage is fascinating. You have Henry David Thoreau sitting in a jail cell for not paying taxes to support the Mexican-American War, and he writes Civil Disobedience in the 1840s.
Which basically says you have a moral duty to not cooperate with an evil system.
Exactly. That essay travels across the world and is read by Leo Tolstoy in Russia.
The novelist, War and Peace.
The very same. He became a radical Christian pacifist later in life. Tolstoy writes about non-resistance. And who reads Tolstoy? A young Indian lawyer living in South Africa facing racial discrimination named Mohandas Gandhi.
And Gandhi takes it global.
Gandhi transforms it. He takes these scattered ideas, Thoreau's disobedience, Tolstoy's morality, the ancient concept of ahimsa, and builds a methodology, a practical system. He calls it Satyagraha Truth Force, or Soul Force.
And this is the key observation you made earlier.
Right. This is where nonviolence stops being about saving your soul and starts being about dismantling an empire. It becomes a political weapon.
Yeah, we've moved from the philosophy to the methodology. Now let's get back to that shocking statistic you dropped in the beginning. I'm still stuck on it. The 53% versus 26%. This comes from the Chenoweth and Stephan study, right?
Yes. Erica Chenoweth and Maria J. Stephan. They wrote a book called Why Civil Resistance Works. It's a landmark study. They analyzed 323 major campaigns between 1900 and 2006.
And just to clarify for the listener, what qualifies as a major campaign? We're not talking about a protest to save a local park here.
No, these were maximalist campaigns.
Yeah.
Meaning they weren't just lobbying for a new stop sign. These were movements trying to overthrow a dictator, kick out a foreign military occupation, or secede from a country. High stakes, the highest stakes.
Okay, so regime change, life and death stuff. And the results were clear.
Crystal clear, unambiguous. Nonviolent campaigns succeeded 53% of the time. Violent insurgencies, guerrilla wars, civil wars succeeded only 26% of the time.
That completely contradicts the might makes right assumption. If I'm a rebel leader and I look at that chart, I'm throwing away my AK-47 and buying a printing press or a fax machine.
You should, because nonviolence is statistically the weapon of the strong. And a big reason for that is something they discovered called the 3.5% rule.
I love this rule. It sounds so specific. Break it down for us.
Chenoweth went through the data and found that no government has ever withstood a challenge where 3.5% of the population actively participated during a peak event.
3.5% doesn't sound like a lot. In the US, that's like 11 or 12 million people, which is a lot, but not a majority.
It sounds small as a percentage, but in terms of active mobilization, it's a colossal number. Think about it. Most revolutions, even successful ones, are fought by a tiny fraction of 1% of the population.
Right, a small vanguard.
Exactly. But if you have 3.5% of the people in the streets going on strike, risking arrest, that usually implies that the silent majority, 80% or 90%, agree with them, even if they're too scared to participate. It represents a tipping point of legitimacy.
The point of no return.
Yes. We saw this in the People Power movement in the Philippines, the Singing Revolution in the Baltic states, and the Rose Revolution in Georgia. Once you hit that number, the game is usually over.
So why is it easier for nonviolence to hit that 3.5% than violence? Why can't an armed insurgency get 3.5% of the people?
It's the participation advantage. Think about a violent insurgency. Who can participate? Who can join a guerrilla army?
Young men, fit men, people willing to sleep in the jungle, carry heavy packs, and kill people. It's a young man's game, mostly.
Exactly. It's a very high barrier to entry. Physically demanding, morally compromising for many. You're excluding women, children, the elderly, the disabled, and anyone who has a moral objection to killing.
Your recruitment pool is tiny.
Very tiny. But in a nonviolent campaign, everyone can play. A grandmother could boycott a brand. A student can walk out of class. A doctor can go on strike. You can bang pots and pans from your window. You can stay home from work. You can march. The barriers to entry are much, much lower.
So you have a larger pool of labor, of resistance.
Much larger and more diverse. And that diversity is key. More people means more pressure points on the regime. A dictator can bomb a rebel camp in the mountains without losing sleep. He can't bomb the entire city center, the factories, and the schools when his own grandmother might be in the crowd.
That's a powerful image. It shifts the battlefield from a remote jungle to the very heart of the country, somewhere the dictator can't easily attack without destroying what he wants to rule. But I want to push on the how. How does it actually work? I mean, okay, you have 3.5% of the people on the street, you have signs, you have chants, but the dictator still has the tanks, he has the payroll. How do you actually get him out of the palace? It's not like he just gives up because he feels unpopular.
No, absolutely not. This is where we get into the mechanisms of victory. It's not about changing the dictator's heart. It's about making it impossible for him to rule. The core concept is pulling the pillars.
Pulling the pillars. I like the architectural metaphor. Explain that.
Imagine the regime is a building. The dictator is the roof. He doesn't float in the air. He is supported by pillars.
Okay.
Those pillars are the military, the police, the media, the business elite, the civil service, the labor unions, the religious institutions, the sources of his power.
Okay, so the table legs holding him up.
Right. Violent insurgents try to destroy the building by firing rockets at it. They try to blow it up.
Yeah.
Nonviolent resistance doesn't attack the roof. It simply removes the pillars. It convinces the pillars to stop holding the roof up.
And the roof falls down on its own?
Exactly. The source identifies 4 mechanisms for how this happens. The first, and most rare, is conversion. This is the Gandhi ideal. You use moral suasion to convince the opponent they are wrong. They change their mind.
That sounds rare, like lightning strike rare.
It is rare. It's the moral high ground.
Yeah.
But you can't bank a revolution on the dictator suddenly growing a conscience.
Not a great bet.
The second is accommodation. The opponent realizes the cost of fighting is too high. The boycotts are bankrupting the businesses. The strikes are paralyzing the economy. So they negotiate. They give you what you want. Elections, rights, to make you go away.
Okay, that's practical. That's a deal. It's a cost-benefit analysis.
Exactly. Then you have nonviolent coercion. This is where the regime is paralyzed. The leader wants to act But he can't. The bureaucrats lose the paperwork for arrests. The bus drivers won't drive the soldiers to the protest. The electricity goes out at the palace because the utility workers go on a slowdown strike.
The system simply refuses to process the dictator's commands. It's like the operating system freezing up. He's clicking the mouse, but nothing is happening.
Right. And the fourth, the most extreme and often the most effective, is disintegration. The regime simply dissolves. The pillars defect so completely that the government ceases to exist as a functioning entity. The police join the protesters, the soldiers lay down their arms.
And for disintegration to work, you need the big pillar. You need the guys with the guns to switch sides.
The military. This is the vital role of the military, and the stats here are mind-blowing. Security force defections increase the probability of success by 60%.
Wow. So getting the army on your side is more important than almost anything else. It's a massive force multiplier.
And get this, uprisings are 46 times more likely to succeed if the military switches sides.
46 times.
46.
So that's the ball game. If you get the army, you win. If you don't, you probably lose. It's that simple.
It's the kingmaker. And here is where the psychology of nonviolence comes in. Why do soldiers defect? They are less likely to fire on crowds that look like them. If the crowd is armed rebels in camouflage, the soldier shoots. It's us versus them. It's their training.
But if the crowd is women, children, people singing, people praying...
It's us versus us. It triggers a shared identity. They see their neighbors. They see their grandmothers. They see their own families in the crowd. And it becomes very, very hard to follow the order to fire, so they lower their weapons.
This brings us perfectly to our case study, because everything you just described, the massive participation, the military defection, the disintegration, it all happened in one specific place in 1986, the Philippines.
The People Power Revolution. This is the textbook example of disintegration in action.
So let's set the scene for the listener. You have Ferdinand Marcos. He's been the autocrat for 20 years.
A brutal regime, martial law. He's plundered the economy, cronyism is rampant. He calls a snap election in 1986 to prove to the world, and specifically the US, his main backer, that he's still popular.
And he blatantly steals it.
Oh, completely. The fraud is obvious. The computers counting the votes literally had their operators walk out on live television in protest because the numbers were being faked.
And the people are done. But the spark isn't just the election, right? The fire starts inside the regime.
Right. The cracks appear in the pillars. Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile and General Fidel Ramos, two of his top enforcers, guys who have been with him for years, defect. They realized the game was up, or they feared for their own lives, and they barricaded themselves in two military camps right in the middle of Manila.
So now Marcos has to crush them. He prepares the loyalist army. He has the firepower. This should be a quick, bloody end to a failed coup. But then something unusual happens.
Cardinal Yemes Sin, the influential Catholic leader, goes on the radio.
And he doesn't call for war. He doesn't say, go get your guns and fight for the rebels.
No, he calls for the public to protect the rebels. He asks the people to go to EDS Epifanio de los Santos Avenue, the main highway that runs between the two camps. He says, go help our friends.
And the image here is just cinematic. 2 million civilians fled the highway, not thousands, 2 million.
It was a sea of humanity, yellow ribbons everywhere. It was a festival of resistance. And Marcos sends the tanks. The Marine commander, General Tadiar, is ordered to clear the road at all costs. He rolls up with armored columns.
And this is the moment of truth. You have armor plating and machine guns versus what?
Nuns, priests, ordinary families.
Yeah.
The source describes nuns kneeling in front of the tanks reciting the rosary. Civilians were offering the soldiers candy, flowers, cigarettes. They were linking arms, singing songs. They were appealing to the soldiers' humanity.
It's so disarming. Literally, how do you run over a nun praying the rosary? How do you justify that to yourself?
You don't. Not if you want to sleep at night. Not if you consider yourself a human being. The pilots were ordered to bomb the rebel camps from the air. They refused. They landed their helicopters and defected, or they intentionally missed their targets.
You're the soldiers on the
They
ground.
refused to fire. They started hugging the protesters. The pillar of the military didn't just crack, it vanished. It melted into the crowd.
Crumble.
That is disintegration. Marcos realized he had no levers left to pull. He was sitting in the Malacañang Palace, shouting orders into a phone that wasn't connected to anything real anymore.
He was a king with no subjects.
The US finally told him to cut and run. He fled via helicopter. A bloodless revolution, won by millions of people whose only weapons were their bodies and their beliefs.
That is such a powerful story. It really highlights the difference in leadership, doesn't it? We have these two archetypes in the source material.
The architect of conquest versus the architect of peace. It's a great framing.
The architect of conquest, that's Napoleon, that's Mao. The guys who use force.
Right. These are leaders who see violence as an efficient tool for order. And to be fair, they get rapid results. Napoleon stabilized France after the chaos of the revolution. Mao unified China after the century of humiliation.
But look at the legacy.
The legacy is the problem. Napoleon left France exhausted and defeated, surrounded by enemies. Mao left a legacy of state-sponsored violence, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution that traumatized generations. It creates what the source calls a repressive trajectory.
Because if you build your house with a hammer, you tend to treat every problem like a nail. Violence becomes the default tool.
Precisely. Contrast that with the architect of peace, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Mandela. Gandhi talked about nonviolence for the strong. He made a crucial distinction. There is the nonviolence of the weak, I'm not hitting you because I'm scared, and the nonviolence of the strong, I could hurt you, but I choose not to.
That is a power move. To have the capacity for violence, but to restrain it.
It is the ultimate power move.
Yeah.
King called the goal the beloved community. The goal wasn't just to defeat the white supremacist, it was to win them over, to create a society where everyone could live together afterward. You're not trying to destroy your enemy, you're trying to destroy the enmity.
And that leads to the question of what happens next. Because winning the revolution is only half the battle. You have to run the country. What do the stats say about stability after the fact?
This is where the pragmatic argument for nonviolence becomes absolutely undeniable. Countries emerging from nonviolent campaigns are 10 times more likely to transition to stable democracies within 5 years.
10 times.
10 times.
That is a massive margin. That's not a statistical blip. Why? What's the mechanism there?
It makes perfect sense if you think about the skills required to win. If you win by shooting people, the people who come to power are the ones who are good at shooting, secrecy, and top-down hierarchy. They tend to keep using guns to solve problems. Executions, purges, suppressing dissent. We call this the violence trap.
The new boss becomes the old boss.
Often a more efficient and ruthless one. But if you win by negotiation, coalition building, mass mobilization, and public debate.
Then the people who come to power are the ones who are good at negotiation and coalition building.
Exactly. You have already practiced democracy in the streets before you ever get to the parliament. You've built the civic muscles necessary to govern a pluralistic society. You've learned to compromise.
That is such a crucial point. The method of the revolution determines the quality of the government that follows. The means become the ends.
They really do.
Right.
And we have to talk about the human cost, specifically the trauma. The source touches on the social learning aspect of this.
Yeah, the cycle of trauma.
Violence isn't just political, it's psychological. It damages a society's software. One of the studies cited says that boys exposed to violence are twice as likely to become abusers themselves. Violence creates intergenerational trauma. It breaks the society.
And nonviolence.
Nonviolence, because it is rooted in empathy and recognizing the humanity of your opponent, helps break that cycle. It fosters what's called positive peace. Not just the absence of war, but the presence of justice and reconciliation.
Now, we've talked a lot about the sudden victories, the Philippines, the disintegration model, but it doesn't always happen overnight. Sometimes it's a slow burn, right?
Right, and that's important to remember. We call this gradualism. Not every win is a dramatic collapse. Look at South Korea.
Democracy by movement.
Exactly. It wasn't one big day on a highway. It was years of protracted street protests in the 1980s that just wore down the Chundewan regime. They forced concessions, they forced elections, they forced an independent judiciary. It was a grinding down of the pillars, not a sudden shattering.
And Brazil.
Brazil had the abertura, the opening. This was a slow, managed transition from military dictatorship from 1975 to 1985. You had wildcat strikes, unauthorized labor strikes, and the Catholic Church providing cover and a space for organizing. They didn't storm the palace. They just expanded the cracks in the wall until the wall came down.
And Kenya, too.
Kenya is a great example of legal nonviolence.
Yeah.
In the 1990s, activists and lawyers forced the repeal of laws that banned other political parties. They used the regime's own legal system against it to open the door for competition, which eventually led to a peaceful transfer of power in 2002.
So whether it's a sudden collapse or a slow grind, the mechanism is the same. You remove the pillars of support until the regime has to change or it simply falls apart.
Exactly. The strategy is consistent, even if the timeline varies.
As we wrap up, I want to zoom out. We've talked about politics, regime change, human rights, but the source makes a fascinating connection to the environment.
This is the planetary angle, and it's so important. Militarism has a massive carbon footprint. The violence system, the military-industrial complex, consumes incredible resources: fuel, steel, rare earth, minerals, chemicals.
It's a huge driver of climate change and resource depletion.
A massive one. So nonviolence isn't just about saving people from bullets, it's about saving the planet from the machinery of war.
The source mentions the Chipko movement in India.
Yes, the tree huggers, and that term was meant literally. In North India in the 1970s, villagers, mostly women, used Gandhian techniques to stop commercial logging in the Himalayas.
What did they do?
They hugged the trees to prevent the loggers from cutting them down.
Putting their bodies between the chainsaw and the forest. A classic nonviolent tactic.
And it worked. It captured the national imagination. It proves that these techniques, civil disobedience, non-cooperation, putting your body on the line, apply to ecological preservation just as well as regime change.
So we have two ways to look at this, as the sources lay out. You can be a principled nonviolent practitioner or a pragmatic one.
And the distinction matters. Principled nonviolence is satyagraha. You do it because it's morally right, because you believe in ahimsa, even if you lose. Like the Moriori, tragically.
And the pragmatic approach?
Pragmatic nonviolence is doing it because it works better. The stats say it works better. You're using it as a tool, a tactic. But there is a risk for the pragmatist.
What's the risk?
If you only use nonviolence because it's effective, once you get into power, you might switch back to violence to stay in power. You treat it like a tool you can discard when it's no longer convenient. The principle foundation helps keep you honest. It's a check on your own power.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's unpack the final thought here. We started with the idea that might makes right, that violence is the ultimate authority.
And we've seen that violence is actually very fragile. It feels permanent because it's loud, explosions are loud, tanks are loud. But historically, it's temporary, it brains itself out, it creates the seeds of its own destruction.
Whereas nonviolence feels slow, it feels quiet. A silent protest doesn't make the evening news like a car bomb does.
But it builds things that last.
Yeah.
It's the difference between a fire and a forest. The fire is impressive and fast, but the forest endures and grows.
So the provocative thought for our listener to take away today is this. If nonviolence is the weapon of the strong, if it is statistically twice as effective, and if it leads to democracies that are 10 times more stable, why do we still tell ourselves the story that violence is the ultimate power?
It's a failure of imagination, I think. We are stuck in the old paradigm. The gun is simple, cooperation is complex.
Is it possible that survival of the fittest doesn't mean survival of the strongest or the meanest or the most ruthless?
I think the data suggests that survival of the fittest actually means the survival of the most cooperative. The groups that learn to work together, to build consensus, to resolve conflict without destroying each other, they are the ones who are truly fit to survive in the long run.
Survival of the most cooperative. I love that. It flips the whole script on human history and evolution.
It does. And in a world facing climate change and global instability, cooperation is the only survival strategy we have left. The tank isn't going to save us from a rising ocean. The handshake might.
Well, on that note, we are going to leave you to mull that over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the paradigms of power. We hope you feel a little more armed with knowledge, of course, than you did when we started.
Keep questioning the narrative, always.
Always. See you next time.